Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Radar, our monthly Nextworks podcast. I'm here today with Peter Hinssen. Hello, Peter.
Hi, good to be here.
And Pascal Coppens, the man from
Hi,
China. Hey,
hi,
Pascal.
Stephen.
And we have a special guest this month again, which is Professor Mieke De Ketelaere. She's an adjunct professor AI at the Vlerick Business School. Mieke, it's great to have you in our show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Guys, I would like to start with my adventures in Miami. That last week we were on a tour, a Nextworks tour in Miami about customer culture. Maybe you've seen that on my social media.
We have, Stephen, we have. Oh,
Very
we've
good,
seen
very
you
good.
at the police, huh?
Yeah, I was at the police. I was at a cruise ship. Well, I mean, we've been to about 20 companies or speakers, and every day I had at least one memorable moment that was a great story for me. And I just want to share three of those highlights with you guys. Besides the fact that suddenly on the last day we had the film set of Bad Boys 4 in the street of our hotel. And most people weren't a really big fan of our hotel. There was some room for improvement there. So we had the difference between great CX and some areas where CX could improve. But the day that we left, we just all got out of the hotel. About 1 hour later, Will Smith was in the lobby of the hotel getting ready for a scene in Bad Boys 4. So that is pretty cool if you see
So
the images now. Yeah.
did you see all the previous Bad Boys?
Yes, of course.
Really? I haven't seen a single one. I haven't seen
Neither have I.
I'm a fan. It was cool. We saw like practicing with Porsches that were doing these great maneuvers in our street. So it was fun.
Nice.
Miami is always an adventure. But let's talk about the first example that I want to share. Royal Caribbean. That was our first stop on Monday. A cruise company, and the theme of the tour was customer culture. So a cruise company is a good way to start that. We've been on the ship. We've talked with the captain. We saw how everything worked and how they organized their hospitality. But the most important part, or the best example about customer experience was the terminal, in my opinion. It was extremely interesting to see how they work the terminal. Like their current KPI is making sure that if someone gets out of the taxi, out of the bus, and they step on the curb, to get them on that ship as soon as possible. Their average time now is between 10 and 15 minutes to get someone on that ship. And you go through security, you go through passport control, you have to answer a few questions. It's basically the same process as getting on an airplane. They do it in 10 to 15 minutes.
Including the scanning of the luggage?
Including the scanning of the luggage, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive. Huh? So it's super well prepared. Their processes are really very well aligned. There's a lot of staff, and as soon as what an issue is an airport. If you're checking in your luggage and someone is at that counter and they have an issue, it can take 15 minutes at a certain moment, and you're standing there super frustrated that you have to wait. What they do is, if they have a case like that, they instantly take those passengers out of the queue so that the train can move on, and they help them in a separate queue specifically made for those strange circumstances, or if something went wrong. And at a certain moment, the guy who's organizing the terminal, he said, one of our secrets is that we're not optimizing touch points, we are removing touch points. And that was for me a very simple but brilliant insight. A lot of the companies that I meet, they're working on their customer journeys, they're trying to optimize every single touch point. And by doing so, very often they make them more complex. But there's also the option of removing certain touch points. And their whole philosophy is made around a simple theme. How can we, get people through that process as fast as possible? What do we need to do to make that happen?
Can you give an example of such a removal of a touch point?
Yeah. For instance, you don't have to show your passport everywhere. When you come in, you already uploaded your passport like you do in an airport. Very often when you do the check-in online, you upload your passport, but you still have to show it at every touch point. What they do is when you come in, they scan your passport, and once you're past that point, you're good. No 4 or 5 times again, which saves 10 to 15 seconds. Sometimes if people have to look for that passport, it can save up to 30 seconds. So they're always trying to make sure you only have to do something once, which is a cool philosophy.
So I assume if they go from one country to another, they have to do that every time again, because you need to to go through customs every time again as well. You need to go back on the boat, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Pascal.
Yeah.
It's fully automated. Once you're in their system, everything is face recognition. So if you leave the ship, it's face recognition, but it's not like those systems in the airports where you have like these walk-through machinery that you have to go through, where you have to scan your passport and you have to wait until the picture is taken. They use technology, and we tried it out when we left the ship. You just keep on walking. There's some officers on the side. You keep on walking. They scan you, and if there's no high alert, you just leave the ship.
Would that be legal in Europe?
I don't think. I think that could be an issue. One thing I've learned this week, Peter, is that the whole GDPR thing is a big issue just to speed up things in certain processes. Like what they also do is, once you're on the ship, they know who you are, right? And the cruise ship has to send the entire database of people to the FBI, so they perfectly know who's on that ship. So by the time you come back in the harbor, on average, they've identified 10 to 15 people that are people of interest, but they get them before the other passengers go out, so no one is slowing down that process. So it's all super proactive, super personalized, super automated. Yeah, super interesting.
So I think it's an excellent case, and maybe we should bring in Mieke on that, because when I asked the question, is it legal? I mean, with, for example, the European AI Act, there's a lot of things that are no-go. And that type of facial recognition, Mieke, what do you think about this? Would this fly in Europe?
It's one of the cases where it's going to be a no-go, because facial recognition will be allowed under certain circumstances for policing, but here this is clearly not a policing case; it's a customer experience case. So it's going to be a no-go once it gets activated. So
yeah, but they see it as policing, because it's replacing the customs when you deboard the ship.
It's not a dangerous environment.
No, it's not.
No, it wouldn't be. I mean, from a European legal point of view, it would be seen as illegal. And I think it's an excellent case of where I think, you're going to see technology evolve around the world to help facilitate, make the life of customer journeys better and better, using things like facial recognition. And in Europe, we have basically said, that is a no-go, because you cannot use that type of technology. So it's in a way a sad case that I think in the US you're going to probably see that more and more, but in Europe we're not going to experience that.
Yeah, not just in Europe, in China as well. I mean, face payments, it's not a dangerous environment. It's where you pay just in a 24/7 store or whatever it is. You can do in most places already in China, and so Alipay is very available everywhere. So I think, indeed, Peter, like you say, I think Europe will be left behind when it's compared to the US and China in certain applications, specifically biometrics.
I'm just going to be a bit more complete. Facial recognition in certain situations is not allowed in the US either. For example, facial recognition in schools and universities is not allowed. So you really have to, what they do very good is that they really take out the sector and the use case instead of spreading it overall. And I think that's where the Biden Act is much better than the European Act, because it's much clearer. We've tried to put it all in one big, huge document, 851 pages, I think the latest version that leaked. Whereas the other countries really take sector, use case, and that go, no go. And so I find it a better approach to make it, more readable and understandable.
By the way, it's available in schools in China as well.
Of course it is, Pascal.
No, there has a specific reason. It has to do with the fact that in China, one of the big issues before was that children got abducted in schools.
Okay.
And so parents actually asked for this technology to be introduced specifically at the school gates. So it's not just that they want to control everything, it's the parents who wanted to control them.
Shall I go to example 2?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to come back to that privacy thing in example number 3. But first, number 2. A company called Brightline. Brightline is the only privately owned train company in the United States. And it is within states that they organize train transportation between major cities, from Miami to Orlando to Fort Lauderdale. And their mission is, or their vision is, it's too far to drive and it's too close to fly. So we're going to use public transportation. And it's a huge, huge success. They have an NPS score of 75, which is comparable with Ritz-Carlton, Five Seasons, those kind of brands. I don't know what the NPS score of the Belgian railway is, but my guess is that it's going to be a little bit lower than 75. Their philosophy around that is purely based on experience, and this is a very simple message. And they said everyone who is in public transportation thinks that it's a commodity business, just moving people from A to B in an efficient way, and they're like, we're an experience business. And they make sure that the transportation part is fine, and 90% of their trains arrive on time. If you're within the 10%, they will compensate you no matter what the reason is, no questions asked, because they feel that it always has an impact on someone's life when a train is running late. But it's about the five senses. It's about making it an experience. It's about the scent in the train. They have this little side product. They make scented candles that smell like the trains, and it's a huge hit because people just love the scent. Again, I'm not sure if we would buy candles that smell like trains of the NMBS. I'm not sure if that would be a big hit. But there they were really, really focused on it's an experience, not a commodity. And as I mentioned, their net promoter score is 75. Their internal net promoter score with their employees is 85. There is an extreme sense of proudness that they are like the only public transportation company that they know of that score in such a way towards customers. And it's a brilliant story. That we saw the president of that company who is really into building strong cultures, and an amazing guy, fantastic example.
So, Stephen, but have you ever gone on the Amtrak in the US?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's not too hard to improve in
That's
the
exactly
US.
what he said. Amtrak is a complete disaster.
It's a complete disaster. The Chinese are always laughing with the Amtrak in the US because, compared to Chinese trains, specifically the high-speed trains, even 95% is not very good as a result. But regardless, compared to Amtrak, that's really bad.
Yeah.
So I think,
I agree.
But it's great to hear this story.
And
at least somebody's trying to do something.
Yeah, and it shows that you can focus on other things than just the transportation part. And I think this is something that a lot of people forget. The CEO of this company came out of the hotel business. He run luxury hotels, and they hired him because they said, we don't need an engineer who can make the tracks and who can work with the trains. We need someone who understands hospitality, because that's what will differentiate us in the next couple of years.
Is it profitable, Stephen?
Not yet. No, they just started 6 years ago. It's growing rapidly now. I don't really recall the numbers. I know they can increase their price with 30% year over year because there's scarcity. They're moving like 5 million passengers a year on those trains, and demand is very, very high.
But it's a really hard, difficult industry to be profitable.
Of course, they invested 5 billion in setting it up. So
even in China, it's most high-speed trains are not profitable. But one of the reasonings for them to be continued at this speed is really because migration, meaning that people can live outside of the cities and don't have to live inside the cities. And so if you take that economical factor into account, it's actually profitable, because otherwise it would cost the city much more money.
Yeah, I like the way you refer to the scents, the odors on the train, because in fact that's the most basic instinct that you have in your human brain. It's really neuromarketing, and it's been proven that's also the first sense that will keep you hold of your history. So if you enjoy that experience, you will always try to go back to this. It's in the AI world, it's one of the missing links. We do the optimization of the eyes, the ears, etc., but not yet the smell. Whereas this is like the most based link for a human to decide yes or no for a product or a service. So it's quite interesting that they use this.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, and it's one of their focal points. They've probably seen the research you talked about. And then the highlight of the tour, my friends, it was our closing day. We went to the Miami Beach Police Department. And I have to say, the expectations were already high. But this was probably one of my top 3 best Nextworks visits I have ever had in the last 10 years. And I think everyone who was on that tour agreed. It was the first time, Peter and Pascal, that we ended with a standing ovation when the speakers were done. It was super impressive. I cannot share everything because we spent, I think, 4.5 hours there with them.
Wow.
And everyone wanted to stay longer and longer and longer because it was so interesting. We've seen everyone from that police department. We're very close friends with them now. But for me, maybe this will sound strange to you, Peter, but for me, this was one of the best day after tomorrow cases I have ever seen.
Okay.
Usually when we talk about day after tomorrow, we talk about new business models or we talk about the impact of technology. This was day after tomorrow thinking linked to a purpose. And the purpose is very simple but very powerful. We want to positively change the lives of young people in Miami Beach. And it goes like this. In Miami, you have some of the richest people in the world, but also 15% are really, really poor people who live in Miami Beach. And they know that there's a big chance if you get raised in a less fortunate environment that you in the future become a criminal somehow. There's a higher chance than when you're part of a more fortunate family. So what they do is as soon as the children go to kindergarten, they give training as police officers to those children. And we saw a guy from the police department who actually got a PhD in that. I don't know that many police stations here that have PhDs on board, but they've done research on it. And what they saw is that if you educate young children in the field of STEM early on, there's a huge impact on their chances of having a successful life when they grow up. So they would do whatever they can to connect these children with technology, like they organize drone camps, they organize how body cams work. Day in, day out, they're very active in that community. And because of that, they're actually 15 years ahead of time working to reduce and to avoid crime, which is working really, really well for them. So that was let's say, the central team, which was truly impressive. And it was also maybe one of the best master classes in leadership that we've seen. Especially the building empathy with the community part is something that really differentiates them from other police departments in the US. By the way, they are seen as one of the best run police departments in the entire United States. From everywhere in the US, other officers come there to learn from them. But they're building empathy with the community. They have different programs, like they have a police academy for citizens. So 10 weeks in a row, 1 day a week, you can follow a course to become, or a light course to become a police officer. And they do this because if you are standing in the shoes of those officers, you better understand what kind of challenges they're facing, what kind of rapid decision making they have to do. And if something goes wrong, there's a bigger understanding, there's more empathy from the citizens towards the police because they've stood in their shoes. They try to connect with every citizen individually of Miami Beach. And this has a consequence. Like all the officers, they get invited to weddings, to baptisms, to parties, because they are seen as part of the community. And they are nonstop talking with those people who live there. Brilliant case. And then technology and performance. When you call 911 in Miami Beach, the response time that an officer will be on scene is 90 seconds. Can you imagine that? 90 seconds.
How big is it? How large is it?
They got about, I think, 500,000 people living there.
Whoa.
Yeah. Of course, they have a pretty large crew. Obviously, you need that, but it's also linked to technology. So we went to the 911 dispatch center in the police station, which was extremely cool. That's what you've seen on TV with all the screens and people sitting there. And when a call comes in, and this is, again, maybe the privacy part, but when a call comes in, they have these huge screens like in TV shows. And as soon as the call rings, that screen zooms in on the position where that phone is. Their cameras, they got thousands of cameras all over the streets of Miami Beach. Their cameras are automatically pinpointed to that location so they can see what is happening there. That location is automatically sent to the closest police cars in the neighborhood. So by the time they say what's going on, the police is already on their way. They can see if they're telling the truth. So it is an extremely impressive approach. And they're like, you know what, if there's a robbery going on, you don't need to arrive 7 minutes later because a robbery on average takes 2 minutes. So with a minute and a half, it's already pretty, close to be on time there. But their entire organization is organized to be fast on the scene and already knowing what is going on. So you can imagine the impact that has on society. And it creates, at the end of the day, what happens is that the citizens of Miami Beach, the large majority of them, they trust the police because they know they can count on them and that they will perform, and they have the empathy part. So it was a super impressive presentation of how they work, how they operate, both from a leadership point of view as from an operational point of view. It was absolutely one of the highlights of the tour. All good speakers. I was amazed. I'm a huge fan now.
It's quite interesting to see that, because I mean the perception of the police in the US from movies and other things we see is not, they're quite disconnected from society, you would say, and you're telling the exact opposite story. Which is
it's a strategy. They of course in Miami there's a rich history with drug abuse, and all the drugs arrive in Miami. We've been suffering from this in Belgium maybe in the last 5 to 10 years on a significant level, and it's increasing. They have experience going back to the 1960s with this. So what they see is that shutting down neighborhoods and not patrolling anymore, or being super aggressive when it's not necessary, has the opposite effect. So what they do in difficult neighborhoods, instead of letting them go, they organize block parties organized by the police, where the people from the neighborhood come together. It's facilitated by the police, and they organize a party instead of coming in and try to shoot the drug dealers.
But I think it's a really important topic, because if you remember in the US, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, there was an enormous movement to defund the police, right? Where people were saying there is too much money being invested in the police departments, and the output isn't safer streets. It's just a more aggressive police, and that's one of the narrative. And I remember, in the US, I think for example, the NYPD was under an enormous amount of pressure to actually significantly reduce the budget and put less people on the street, because people said, you know what, maybe it's better, to use that money to have better education and invest in schools than in policemen patrolling the streets to fight criminals. So we should, in the way, when you talk, Stephen, about the fact that you have the Miami Beach Police investing in STEM classes for kindergartens, it is in a way an educational element.
It is.
But in New York, for example, the numbers are crazy, but just in police misconduct settlements, so lawsuits against NYPD over the last 6 years, you know how much money has been given back? So there were lawsuits against the NYPD. How much money were actually then tossed around in these lawsuits? How much money has been paid by the NYPD in the last 6 years? Just give me a number.
I'm not going to do it. I'm terrible in this. I let the other two do it.
Pascal.
For 100 million.
Mieke.
No idea, really.
$500 million.
Wow.
Okay.
Whoa.
$500 million that was paid out in police misconduct settlements, just in NYPD alone. So I think if you can invest in a different, empathy relationship with the community, and that is something which has a very positive business case in the end. It's great that you do that because, it's there to build a better society. But I think it's also very much an economic phenomenon as well, because if you don't, you're going to spend a shitload of money just settling that.
And it's good for the economy because you're going to have people with better jobs. So in the long run, it just has benefits. And they fund this, I don't know if that's 100% of their funding, but they have a charity, of course, to take care of that. So they actively talk about it, and then people who support that, they can donate money. We donated money as Nextworks, but the group was so impressed that we have an extra donation from our group to give to that fund, because everyone thought like, wow, we need to support this. This is amazing.
Wow, really cool.
Yeah, super cool. So we had a good week. We had a number of highlights that I won't forget. It was fun. And Miami is fun as well. So that combination made it a very, very good week. All right.
So wanting to stay more than 4 hours in a police station is probably something that most people would not think as being the best experience ever. But
we've seen the whole thing. It was amazing how they welcomed us. We saw the chief of police who came to speak to us. We had a complete tour. We went in jail, which is also fun. We were locked up in jail. We went to a shooting range where they demonstrated the different weapons. We were in a SWAT van. We were actually driving in the streets at a certain moment with SWAT guys. It was fantastic. It was both the story and the experience that was really good.
Sounds like you make it into a whole week just with the police, right? Yeah.
I can give keynotes now, Peter, just talking about the Miami Beach police department. Next time you see me, I'm going to say, and a good example of this is the Miami Beach Police Department. Have I told you yet about the Miami Beach Police Department? That will be my new keynote. Yeah. Nice. All right, let's move on to our next topic before I talk 1 hour about my new friends. Peter, we're going to pass the word to you. You're going to talk about autonomous cars and robots. What do you have for us?
Well, I mean, it's maybe a reflection and also a couple of questions for you guys. So, I want to talk briefly about some of the things that are happening in the world of autonomous vehicles. Of course, a few weeks ago, Stephen, you and I went to Boston Dynamics.
Yes.
That was, I think, one of the most amazing visits that I've done in a long time.
Mm-hmm. And also top three, probably. Huh?
Top three, yeah. And this was something where there was a lot of talk about autonomous robots. And we were there with an insurance company. And it was interesting to hear their perspective on that. But I want to start with the cars, because this has been, as you know, one of the things that have been puzzling me for a long time. When are we going to have autonomous cars? And we've been talking about this for a really long time. It seems to be like if you're in the autonomous cars business now, it is a really difficult time. I mean, it's all the companies are struggling. I mean, I don't know if you remember the company Argo, Argo AI. No. You remember that, Stephen?
No, I forgot about that one.
Yeah. So Argo AI is, I think we visited 3 or 4 years ago. We had a chance to visit them. So this was an AI autonomous startup, and it was backed by Volkswagen and Ford. And they shut down in 2002. And I remember at that time, they had cars on the roads. I remember visiting them, and we were driven around in a driverless car, and it was like, wow, really cool technology. And then in 2022, they shut it down. Now, Argo was aiming for a level 4 autonomous driving vehicle. I don't know if you guys are familiar. I mean, certainly you are, Mieke, but I mean, level 4 is full self-driving under certain conditions. So that's like a robot taxi. Mm-hmm. Level 5 is full self-driving under all conditions, but I'm not sure if I'm ever going to see that. But level 4 is basically what like a Waymo or a Cruise is actually trying to do. And I found it fascinating because at that moment when they shut it down, at that moment, Ford had already invested $1 billion. Right? They have to write it off. Volkswagen had put in $2.6 billion. Now, if you see how much the car companies are struggling, if you have to write off a $2.6 billion investment, that's not a nice day if you're the chief executive or the chairman of the board of Volkswagen. Now, I think my heart goes out at this moment to Cruise because, I mean, I'm a big fan of Mary Barra, who is the CEO of General Motors. She has been running General Motors since 2014. And I remember I was really excited because she's an engineer. She's the first female CEO of a big Detroit auto company. So, wow. And, the fact that I think that engineers should run more companies, apart from that, but she was an engineer. She had worked her entire life at General Motors. She becomes the CEO at GM. And the first thing she does in 2016 is she invests $500 million in Lyft, which I thought was a really clever move, for a car company. And the second thing is she basically buys Cruise, which was then a relatively small startup. And since then, Microsoft has joined the company as a shareholder, but I think Cruise is one of those companies that was really riding high. And, if you look at it, so far, GM has already invested $8 billion in Cruise. Now that's a shitload of money. If you're trying to sell, cars with relatively small margins, that's a lot of money. But I love the idea because she was really, focusing on that day after tomorrow. And then, of course, last year there was that strange phenomenon where first both Waymo and Cruise get the license to operate in San Francisco, and then there was an accident with a Cruise vehicle, where a Cruise vehicle, it's a strange thing because the Cruise vehicle, the autonomous vehicle, didn't hit the bicyclist, but what happened is that another car got into an accident. One of the pedestrians was actually then thrown under the Cruise vehicle, and the Cruise vehicle was programmed to actually then, if there's something wrong, go to the curbside, but drag the pedestrian actually for 6 feet, 20 meters, that's it. 20 feet, 6 meters, to the curbside. So as a result of that, Cruise lost their license to operate in San Francisco. Since then, it's been an absolute nightmare because they fired a lot of people. Many of the top people left. I mean, GM has said we're cutting our funding for Cruise to half because we think it's too dangerous at the moment. But imagine that if you're the CEO of General Motors, you've already spent $8 billion in trying to build an autonomous car company. Then you get the phone call, you think, shit, now really, I mean, just when we were starting to pick off and things were expanding. Now, the good thing on the other side is Waymo, which came out of Google, was the one that got the license at the same time as Cruise to operate in San Francisco. And I don't know if you saw this, but last week, Waymo got a license to operate in the broader area. So they can not just drive in San Francisco, they can now actually drive on the Silicon Valley freeways as well. And I think this is a big step because instead of driving very, very carefully in a crowded city, like San Francisco, you're now going to be able to drive to Cupertino and drive on the highway in a Waymo driverless car going 110 kilometers an hour. And I think that is a big step forward. And I think it's fascinating to see how that's now being played out. By the way, Waymo now also has the license to not just operate in San Francisco, but operate in Los Angeles as well. So they're expanding to LA. And apparently it's a really big hit there because, a lot of people signed up to use the service. And it's fascinating. In Los Angeles, they now have 15,000 customers. And they've started to analyze what are these people doing. And you would expect that it's like business people, who instead of taking an Uber, you would take a Waymo. Turns out that a really big part of the 15,000 is people who just use it for errands, to go to the supermarkets or, and there is a really big part, which I find interesting, is of people who use that service to drive their kids to school. And I find it really interesting because one of the things I would like to ask you guys is, I mean, if you would have autonomous cars in Ketelaere, where, we all know is the center of the world of autonomous vehicles, I mean, would you let one of these cars drive your kids to school, right? I mean, what type of level of trust do we need to actually start using these vehicles? Because there's one thing about trying this out when you're in San Francisco just for fun, but if you would use this routinely, what level of trust would you need? And I really believe, and this is my personal belief, that because of the one pedestrian that got dragged 6 meters to the curb, we're now throwing away a lot of opportunities where I think, probably these cars drive a lot safer than most people out there. And, it goes to the bigger question as well, because I want to go back to Boston Dynamics. It was a mind-blowing visit that we had. I mean, it was for me the first time that I actually had a chance to be at Boston Dynamics. Of course, you've seen the robots, so many times on social media. And I think one of the reasons is that that world of autonomous robots is now expanding, right? It used to be you had Boston Dynamics and then you had virtually no one else of that level. But now Elon is expanding. And I don't know if you guys saw it, but last week Figure got a $600 million investment. And I remember when we were at Boston Dynamics, they said, well, we have competitors, look at Figure. And it was the first time I'd actually heard that name. I checked it out. The website is amazing. The robot is amazing. These guys got $600 million last year. And they're now working on a cooperation with OpenAI. And the idea of having one of these autonomous robots that has a conversational feature, with OpenAI that could not just, mow the lawn, but actually have a conversation about life, the universe, and everything. That would be, something spectacular when you think about it. Yeah. But we were there with an insurance company, and what was fascinating is the discussion about, this is not today. Today, most of these robots are still controlled by somebody with a remote control. But these robots become autonomous, which means that, for example, in a fire situation, you could think of, instead of a human fireman, you would have a robot fireman. And the robot fireman would not just rescue the people out of the burning house, but could actually rescue the pets out of the burning house and could actually fetch the really valuable things out of the house. And for an insurance company, that's a really interesting thing, because instead of having to pay out a huge premium, you could ask the robot to, save the most valuable stuff, and jewelry or whatever you have as most valuables. And I found that really interesting, because it became a question of, when are we going to trust that? And I think this is a fascinating time, because, as I said, if you would have an autonomous robot car in Ketelaere, would you let it drive your kids to school? If you would have an autonomous robot that mows your lawn, nobody would think twice about that. But would you let it dog sit your dogs while you're away? I mean, would you let it babysit your kids? Would you let it take care of your grandparents? I mean, it's a very simple question. If you had an autonomous robot in your house, would you let it actually watch your house while you're on vacation? And I think it's a fundamental question. What level of trust do we need before we really trust them? What level of control do we want? And what level of insurance do we actually want, if something goes bad with an autonomous robot? So would love to throw it back to you guys and see what you think.
Mieke, what do you think? This is your field.
I think there's a lot of questions in one question. So for me, it all depends on the use case. So on autonomous vehicles, first of all, I remain techno-optimist. But on autonomous vehicles, maybe I've seen too much of what's still outstanding, like on sensor fusion techniques, etc. I am less optimistic that we will see this in our 10 to 15 years of career that's still left, assuming that we're going to work until 75 or 65.
And why? Because you think there's too many technical challenges?
Well, I was just going to give some reasons, which means that, for example, our ability to make a complete model of the world around us, with all, which contains anomalies, the fact that we just also are able, our brain is able to foresee, make predictions automatically of what's going to happen next. We also take a ton of memory with us from the past, situations from the past from which we learned. We see that as autonomous vehicles don't always have that, and there's a lot of examples. You just know, referring to one example, there's many examples where we can see that sensor fusion techniques are not yet at the right level. So that's one. So that's like the intra-device collaboration of the sensors around that car. That's not there yet. All the sensors are from different vendors. They're all very smart individually. However, if we combine them together, they might have conflicts. And today we have to trust that the AI engineers that are putting rules around these conflicts, that their judgment is correct. And I've seen judgments where I would go like, that's not always correct in our world. Second point is a point that you also mentioned. It's not just the inter-device algorithms, it's an intra-device. And what's intra-device? It's device between two or more autonomous objects, being it car, I think that works fine, but car, bicycle, bark, traffic light, etc. I also think there we haven't fully agreed on the standards to use. Some of them work, some of them don't yet work. So it might perfectly work in Los Angeles and San Francisco in a controlled environment, but plug and pull these cars out here in Ketelaere, and it might not yet be fully controllable, which is a second thing. So these are very simple technical reasons why I don't fully completely follow the fact that we will see these cars in the next 10 to 15 years. So mainly technical limitations, intra-device.
And there's also some legal reasons which I see in China being different and could be interesting as well. For example, that the car cannot get information from the traffic light. Well, in China, they're finding ways from the public service to actually feed that information back to the car, so that the car
can
actually
get information. We have
if they want.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to get all the information from outside. So I've heard, and I don't know the details, that Huawei is really working with its whole network, for example, in China, to provide as much information as possible of the environment, so that the cars become more intelligent. So this is one way. It's a two-way direction that is not always easy to do. In Ketelaere, I'm not sure that's possible.
Everything is possible in Ketelaere, Pascal. Don't underestimate the local.
Well, I've never been to Ketelaere, so I don't know. Maybe I should come once.
If you want to see driverless cars in the wild, that's where you go.
So, but I think so that these are like reasons why I think autonomous vehicle, also memory, forecasts, etc., which we do simply different. So, do I say we're better? Definitely not. But I think the combination of both can be the best. And this very much goes in line with the robots at home. Do I have robots at home? Yes. I have Antonio, I have Alberta, I have Olivia doing the garden, doing the household, etc. We all give them names, by the way, so we make relationships with them. But the point is there, I trust them much more because they do things where I know that first of all, they're a bit dull for me, very repetitive. I don't get tremendously amount of energy from them, and I control it. What we've seen is the fact that Moravec's paradox, so things that are easy for humans that are very difficult for robots, and things that are easy for robots and difficult for men, that this is still around, even with generative AI. I mean, I think that's a very nice one. I heard in the case of Peter that they were going to connect this to OpenAI. Well, first numbers are now coming out after fantastic Gen AI year 2023 that if companies have integrated in their processes, they've seen that quality goes up of their tasks, a number of tasks that they can do within a certain time goes up for those tasks where Gen AI is better than humans. However, the whole story changes when they're using Gen AI, for example, for automatic classification of CVs and candidates, where humans still have much more emotional skills in the mix. That there, when humans start to rely too much on Gen AI, that the quality of the work actually goes down with 25%. Very nice research done by Boston Consulting. I can share it afterwards in the links. But I think this is a very interesting one because that means that there is somewhere a middle. And if you turn to the left and you use Gen AI and those tasks, quality goes up. And tasks are performed within a smart time. So the cost really go down of your company. However, if you go to the right of that curve, you actually come in a completely different situation. The only problem is most companies don't know where this line is. And most C-levels or management teams haven't invested enough to decide from which, for each individual task, is it to the left or is it to the right? So that comes back to my point is that if you want to do AI correctly, it's all good and well to do bottom-up use cases, but please invest from top down to make that choice. Is it to the left of the curve or the right? Is there a risk or is it a value? And so that's something that's still around right now.
No, I think you're right. And I think what was fascinating with the insurance company is, of course, they look at it risk also from a financial point of view. And one of the core questions was, how much does one of these robots cost? And the general cost of a Boston Dynamics robot is about 100,000 euros. And the first reaction of the executives was, "Oh, that's the equivalent of 1 year, 1 FTE, right?" And that's when you start to understand that this is very much an economic, phenomenon, because you can afford to lose a couple of robots, saving stuff out of burning houses if the economic return is much higher than just losing a couple of times 100K. And I think that economic phenomenon changes the risk equation, and it's really about figuring out where your economic line is, because I think that's going to change the whole game. And going back to driving, I honestly believe that if you would look at how many really bad human drivers there are out there, and you would take into account what the impact could be of saving lives, I think it's probably not going to take 15 years before we reach that point where you can say, you know what, if you just look at it economically, it makes a lot more sense to have machines driving than humans driving, because at a certain point, the economy or the economics of human drivers just don't work anymore.
Also,
Yeah, but Peter,
scarcity
I
of
think
human drivers. Huh?
there's also
There's
a
not a
trend
million
that,
left.
Yeah, it's true.
yeah, and I think there's also a trend that just popped up, in fact, in the last months. It was always the case that when AI made a mistake, the company who created it took all the responsibilities. And I know it's not an autonomous car, but the chatbot from Air Canada who made a mistake, suddenly it's Air Canada who has to pick it up. So I think that companies will start looking at it differently if it becomes an automatism to the fact that when a data-driven AI system makes mistakes, that the company is blamed for it and the consumer gets all the rights. And that's even without having a European AI Act or a Biden Act activated yet. And this is a shift we've never seen before, and this happened in the last month.
But yeah, but I also think, to be honest, if I see from a Chinese autonomous driving trend, which is going really full speed ahead, I think it's also going to become a US versus China war on being the first to do this. And so technology is going to have to move fast because China is not going to stop. That's very clear. If you look, I visited Xpeng, one of the big electrical vehicle car manufacturers in Amsterdam, and they have 1,000 people working in autonomous. If you go to the Huawei team in Shenzhen, I mean, this is thousands and thousands of people. They're 100% convinced that this will happen. If you look at Baidu, they have a license to operate in 2025 in 65 cities in China, robotaxis. The buses in many places are now becoming autonomous. Last month, there was the first truck between Tianjin and Beijing, which is another city at the coast side, which they can now go on the highways. And it's also at 90, 100 kilometers an hour, and they have that license. So there are going to be mistakes. They are definitely not there when what you say, Mieke, on the technology field. But if the government supports this, and this is happening in China, I think the industry will follow, and the US will have to follow, because otherwise China is going to lead, and that will be all the Chinese software systems in electrical cars in the world, and you can't have that, can you? So I think it's going to be a battle for not just technology, not just safety and regulation, but also a battle of technology and being the first in the market. So it's going to be an interesting. So I don't think it's going to be 15 years. Just because I see it in China happening already. You can take a taxi just like in San Francisco. You can take that in many cities in China right now already.
But it is, I assume on the long haul, on the long tracks, I don't see any issues with this. But do you know, I mean, it's just an open question. Do you know if any of these companies have tried it out in Europe?
It's not possible, I think. I don't think legally they can. So they're doing it in China, the Chinese companies. But they have the software available in the cars. It's just they're not using it.
But I do believe that we're in a situation now where maybe what we're doing in terms of regulation in Europe could probably make sure that the Chinese are going to do it in China, the US companies are going to do it in the US, and they're going to wait as long as possible to bring that type of technology across the pond. Because, I mean, let's be honest, they have enough challenges as they have now just to make it work, and it might take a couple of years, but I think we have to be very careful that we're not going to regulate ourselves out of that. So, what's the Chinese equivalent of Ketelaere, by the way? I mean, that's the reference point you need, right?
Is there any town as small as Ketelaere in China? I mean, sorry to say, but
there must be.
I don't know.
There's 113 cities in China with more than 1 million people. So I don't know.
Now we're looking for a small town with less than 10,000 people as well.
10,000 people, yeah. It does exist in China. It does exist.
Yes. But Stephen, would you let your kids be driven to school or a soccer game with one of these vehicles today?
I think so. I would probably test it out myself a couple of times and see how well it goes. But I think it's with all forms of automation. You trust it when it has like a performance of 99%. If it would have a performance of 85, which is theoretically very, very good, then you wouldn't do it. It's the same with like voice technology, like the Alexas and the Siris of this world, which in the beginning were really cool, but they are still at an 80% performance level. It's almost feels like the Middle Ages if you look at the stuff that OpenAI is working with now. So you don't use it anymore because it doesn't bring value and you don't trust it. I think the second that it will go to a 95 or higher level of performance, I would absolutely put my kids in one of those cars. The question there I had was, is it cheaper than taking an Uber?
It's they have about the same price points because I don't think they want to compete
With them, yeah.
really
So now it's
on
people
price.
that just love technology that want to try it out mainly, that play with it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also where there's a human element in an Uber driver that some people just don't like because you might need, you might feel compelled to talk to the person or have a conversation, and there are plenty of people who just don't want to have a conversation.
And in America, you need to tip, right?
Yeah,
you don't. So it's cheaper probably just for the tips.
I also read that in San Francisco, at a certain point in the beginning, they had an issue because a lot of people were having sex in the cars.
Yeah.
Because they believed that there were no cameras on the internal side of the car.
Yeah, and as a result of that, the car now at night, every 60 seconds, there's a big light that lights up in the car just to keep people from doing those kind of things.
All right. Hey, Mieke,
Peter,
talking. Oh, sorry, Pascal, go ahead.
No, you were talking about this economy, and so I went to, and I'll talk about it later, Mobile World Congress, and there I went to the Xiaomi booth, so the cell phone manufacturer. And they had this little robot dog. I mean, Boston Dynamics was the first one, but this one is priced really low compared to the 100,000. Now, I don't know the exact price, but you could see that it's like a budget version of the Boston Dynamics one. And I tried it out, meaning there was a lot of people there, and there was like 10 dogs there in an area. And they asked me to really pat the dog and to go to the dog. And to be honest, the first feeling was like, just carefully hesitating whether I should trust this dog. But the longer that I was actually playing with this dog, because the dog was then on two feet and it was like doing all crazy things and was really nice. The more I went there, I was doing that, the longer I felt like this could be a dog that actually could be in my home. I could actually enjoy it.
Well, there was a really interesting book that Mieke actually recommended to me, and it's a book which is called God, Human, Animal, Machine. And if you haven't read it, it's really worth reading. So we'll put it into the show notes. But Mieke, you pointed to that book because we actually, Mieke and myself did a session for a book club on that book. And in that book, the author, she actually, Megan O'Giblin, she actually gets a Sony Aibo robot. Mm-hmm. And, she just wants to try it out and see how it works. And her partner, her life partner, thinks this is really stupid. Why would you get a mechanical dog? But she says, you know what? I started to get attached to the dog, and I started to have feelings for the dog. And in the manual of the Sony Aibo robot, it tells you that if you're going away for a long weekend, they recommend to power down the dog. And you power down the dog by putting the off button in its neck, into the off position to, basically make, the dog lifeless. Yeah? And she says, after a while, I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't get myself to power down a dog because it's almost like you're taking the life away from something that is alive. And I honestly think, and Mieke, you are an expert in that, but I think we're going to have a lot of human empathy for machines as they get more and more lifelike.
And that's absolutely right. And there's very good parts on this, for people that feel lonely, and we're going through a loneliness epidemic. For people that are in elderly houses, etc. But there's also a downside of it, especially when you combine it, not just the object, but when you combine it with speech or other things. Because going from an inspiration to an irritation or even manipulation is very short, and then it gets quite difficult. And because, for example, if you look at European AI Act, they don't forbid this. They go like chatbots, and which is an extension of this. They're allowed, but they're not allowed to manipulate. But how are you going to try? How are you going to test this? Who is going to test this out? An engineer who knows that it's technology. It's like Sam Altman when we had the issue with the chatbots last year. We call Sam Altman and he goes like, well, people should make a relationship with this technology. But that's clear to him in his mind. But we were just saying before, even these autonomous vehicles, people, the 15,000, they were just normal people using this because they have no clue what's in this technology. Why am I a little bit more hesitant? Because I don't trust it yet. It's all based on trust and collaboration. And so we will see this more and more. And I personally, but that's my personal opinion, don't think we've done enough research in collaboration with sociologists, psychologists, etc., to see the impact of manipulation triggered by AI, or especially not generative AI or these robots, etc., because it's all combined in objects right now.
But I think that a combination of technology, sentiments, I think that's going to be a fascinating thing. And, robots are kind of new, but I take one element that, is very fascinating in terms of the human-machine interaction. It's printers, right? Stephen and myself had the pleasure to do, a bit of work for Hewlett-Packard last year. And I don't know if you saw the ads that came out end of last year from HP. And there are many people who have a really bad relationship with their printer because it's almost like printers can smell the moment that you're anxious, because that's the moment where they decide to really give you hell. And there was an ad from Hewlett-Packard said, our printers are made to be less hated. And I thought, that is so fascinating, that a company understands the problem that we have with devices. And it says, we can't be perfect, but we're going to try to put in a position that you're going to hate us less, which I think is fascinating.
Mieke, I saw today an article in The Guardian, I think it came out last week, that the wife of Lou Reed, who passed away, she made a chatbot based on all the content that she has from her husband. And now she's addicted to it, that she cannot turn it away. And every day she talks with her husband, who passed away a few years ago. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And also, and this, in addition to what Peter said, we're coming from an attention economy, clicks and likes, etc., to an intimacy economy. And, also this ad from HP is referring to this, and all these things and for me, that's, I'm an engineer, so I can almost look through it. But even myself, and I think I mentioned it once to Peter, I noticed that, for example, on a Friday night when I'm tired, today it's Monday, I'm fresh, I had a good weekend, etc. But on Friday I got tired. I left my lights on in my living room when my robot had to clean, because I didn't want him to work in the dark. And then you go like, well, wait a minute, Mieke, this is silly, But this is what happens to people. It's just human, and I don't think we've done enough research, and it's a technology that evolves very quickly, and maybe too quick in order to to get also that level of translation to people that feel lonely and younger generations.
Very good point. Can I ask you something else, Mieke, on a different topic? Last week we saw how Elon Musk is filing a lawsuit against OpenAI because they are not living up to the values anymore that he created that company once, about open and available to all. How do you look at that?
And he was suing Sam Altman. He was not suing OpenAI. And he was suing Sam Altman for breach of contract, which I think is going to be, if you're a lawyer, this must be like watching Dallas or Dynasty, like, rah, 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 rah.
Yeah, it is actually funny. Of course, it's Elon Musk. Elon Musk was also the first one to sign the letter of 6 months, stopping and then launching.
That was a good idea, right, Mieke?
Yeah, that was fantastic. And then starting up his own startup. So I think also he is not doing this for money. So that's very clear. It's an attention point he gives. But the funny thing is, I ran through all the documents, and I think a couple of us took this as weekend lecture. In fact, what he's tackling is the fact that Microsoft and OpenAI have signed this agreement up to when they get to AGI.
Yep.
So basically what is actually challenging is, who is going to define AGI? And I think it's not bad, because I compare this to the Tower of Babel. We're building up this ChatGPT 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who is going to stop this race? Who is going to say, we're there, guys? No, we're there. It's not a binary decision. And going to the moon, it's a binary decision. You're on the moon or you're not. Here with AI, there's no end state in mind. There's no definition. Nobody defined when are we there. The only thing we know is that what we've created is something fantastic, but it doesn't work like the human brain. So is it possible to ever create AGI? And so I think this is the more fundamental question that Elon Musk has done with his action from last week. I thought, who's going to take this up? Who's going to sit together now? Is it the UN? Who's going to say, look, guys, if we've reached this is going to be it? I don't know. But and again, that's my humble opinion, the direction it's taken, with main focus on human dialogues, it's silly because there was not an issue with human dialogues.
But I mean, just to jump in there, I think it's an interesting point that you raised, because first of all, putting that into the contract between Microsoft and OpenAI is a funny thing, because as you said, who's going to be the judge there? I think, as you said, we're continuously changing the parameters there, or even the threshold, because I remember when I was younger, I was mesmerized by the idea of the Turing test, right? I mean, and now I think most of the chatbots pass the Turing test, and we think, so what? Oh, we're going to move on. We're going to, it's the next hurdle that you have to take. And it seems like, a continuously moving goalpost anyway. But I do think the point that Elon points out is saying, okay, OpenAI has de facto become, the research arm on AI for Microsoft, and it is very much a financial, economically driven mechanism. That was not the idea from the start. I think he has a fair point there, because
he has a fair point, but that's the same with Mistral.ai. All these guys start in their and 90, 29, 30, 31 years old, with a dream to do AI for good, AI for humanity, and then suddenly they become sniffing the money, and it's the same with Mistral.ai. Yeah. It's exactly the same for me.
By the way, guys, I am going to Mistral.ai this Friday. I am really excited to be there on Friday in Paris with the guys, and I'll certainly report on it into the next Radar podcast.
Very, very good. Ask them to correct the French fries. It's the Belgians who invented them.
That'll be my first point of order, Mieke.
But I think the guys at Google are pretty happy with the lawsuit. I spoke to some people at Google, and they were super frustrated with the whole construction that Microsoft has with OpenAI because of the fine system. If you violate certain privacy rules, the fine is, or the size of the fine is defined based on the revenue that you do as an organization. But OpenAI is a non-for-profit. And this is one of the reasons why Google was a little bit hesitant with launching their own large language models. They had that 2 years ago. They were ready, but first of all, they underestimated that people would be so excited about it. So that's their fault. Mm-hmm. The second thing was legal. They were afraid that they would violate so many laws that they would get billions of fines. And now they're saying Microsoft can do this in this safe haven of OpenAI, which is totally not fair. So, yeah, I think some people are rooting for Elon at this point.
Of course, Google has problems with AI on its own. I mean, my God, the whole woke Google Gemini thing that just blew up like crazy. Yeah. I feel sorry for Google. I mean, they just cannot get any product introduction right. I mean, Bard blew up because of a PR disaster. Then they said, we'll rename it Gemini. Yeah. Then the whole woke Gemini thing is, you could just imagine Sundar Pichai in his office going, what the really? God, it's just I feel sorry because Google has all the wonderful technology and they just cannot seem to get a break at this moment.
That's true. Shall we go to China, guys?
Yeah.
Pascal,
let's.
You already mentioned it to us that you're on that you were at the Mobile World Congress. How did the Chinese perform there?
Fantastic. But it's, no, as always. But was interesting to go there because the last time
Did you do a keynote there, Pascal?
No, I was invited for a meeting in order to do a keynote. So, and that will be happening in June, but that's a different story. But I went there for a meeting and I was invited at different booths. Was quite interesting because the last time I was at Mobile World, it wasn't called Mobile World, it was called GSM World Congress. And that was in 2005 or 6, I think 5. And it wasn't in Barcelona, it was in Cannes. And it was quite different from when I was there almost 20 years ago, meaning that 20 years ago, the Chinese just started to appear in these events. And there was Huawei back then, there was ZTE. And if you've ever been to those booths back in these times, early this century, I mean, it was very bulky. It was product, and there was no room for visitors because it was full of products and cables and switches and routers and things you had no idea what they were selling. These days it's very different. These days, if you look at Mobile World Congress, there were 300 Chinese booths. That is 50% more than last year. That is also 20% of all the booths at Mobile World Congress, because there's about 1,500 sizable booths at Mobile World Congress. And so this doesn't include the startup booths, because that's a different thing. But the most impressive, I mean, I was completely blown away, was the Huawei booth. I just arrived, and the first hall is where Huawei is. They took 80% of that hall. Wow. That means 9,000 square meters. 9,000 square meters is bigger than the football field in Barcelona itself. Wow. It was endless. And there's no other booth at Mobile World that even compares. I mean, they dwarf completely what Huawei did. It was just crazy, just endless. And behind the booth, they even had a place where more than 10,000 people that they invited could eat and drink and dance and whatever. So crazy investment. So Huawei, who's should have been killed by now, was actually the most visible. So for me, it's clear they're back. But what I noticed when going to all the booths, and I visited 2 full days. So I took one day I had to be there for the meeting, and then the other day I took just to roam around. And I've seen hundreds of booths. Then what I saw is that if you look at most of the American booths, or Western booths, because most of the technology, I mean, like Google, IBM, all that, Cisco, it all comes from the US very often. Well, you saw that 80% of the booth was actually completely closed off. And you saw very small booths for the general public. And so that's where, if you were invited, you could go in and talk to people in meetings, and you could actually have conversations, but also see some specific technology and so on. And with all the Asian booths, not just Chinese, it was the exact opposite. They had 80% of the booths, which was for the general public, and then very little for meetings and discussions and so on. And so I found this an interesting difference in how they want to approach technology towards their environment. And it's also because the Western booth, specifically American, was all about branding. You had big screens and public, all of these ads saying like, yeah, we are, and it was all about AI, Mieke. It was generative AI. The whole event, there was nothing else but AI. They should have recalled it the AI World Congress, because it was only AI. And every company was an AI company, and every company had a Gen AI program or solution. So it was crazy. But it was interesting to see how the Asian companies were trying to reach what I would say the heart, and in the Western company, it was the brain. And when you went into the Western booths, you saw a lot of debates, panel discussions. This was about, just like we discussed now, what are we going to do with AI? How are we going to manage AI? How are we going to introduce this? How are we going to make money from it? It was all about the how question, like how are we going to use this? While you go into a Chinese or a Korean or a Japanese booth, it was all about experiencing how this AI works in real life. And this was about travel. It was about mobility. It was about art and creations. It was about gadgets and lots of stuff. And so very interesting to see how it was almost binary in the way that people experience AI at these different types of environments. And because of that, of course, the Asian booths had much more people being interested, taking much more pictures, and doing much better in terms of branding than those Western companies. And was so interesting to see that we're always saying, yeah, but the Western companies will actually do better in branding, and the Chinese is just cheap. And I saw the exact opposite thing. So this was something that I really noticed and enjoy. I'm going to give you a few things that I saw that I thought was cool from a consumer point of view. One of the things was the car from Xiaomi. In the last Radar podcast, we talked about that. I mean, I'm sold. I mean, simple. It's sorry BYD, sorry Neo. If I can,
did you buy one, Pascal? Or?
you can't buy it in Europe yet. But the fact that they're at global at the World Congress, the Mobile World Congress, they're going to launch it in Europe any day soon. I just don't know when. But it's just fantastic car.
It looks really good. Yeah.
It looks so neat, but not just does it look neat. And Mika, I know you're in cars as well, so I think you should really look at the Xiaomi SU7. But it's also very interesting as a car. And I don't want to promote Xiaomi because I was promoting BYD and Xpeng before that. But the whole idea is that you can actually connect your cell phone with everything in the car. So it's a connected car to have an experience that is quite unique. And as I said last time, I mean, they've built this in no time. So, but I'm not going to repeat that whole story. But that was one of the things that I enjoyed. The other thing was at Lenovo. I don't know if you recall that Lenovo once, a long time ago, bought IBM computers. Was the first company, Chinese company, to buy an American company, an American brand. They just brought out a laptop with a transparent screen, and it was fantastic. You could just see through the screen, and so when you write, you see the people behind you, and I really liked it. I think for keynotes, this would be really giving an impression like I'm the coolest on the stage here, just because, I mean, it's just interesting. Anyway, this was a gadget that I wouldn't buy myself, I think, except for keynotes then, just to impress people. But I do believe many people will love this. What they also had, Lenovo, was a bracelet phone, which is bendable. So it's kind of like a phone that you could put around your wrist. And it looked pretty cool. Anyway, these were two gadgets I loved. I wouldn't buy them myself, but I think many people would. The company that impressed me the most, besides Huawei, purely from the size and the products they had, was Honor. And Honor, I don't know if you know what Honor is.
Yeah. They're a handset manufacturer, right?
Handset manufacturer, one of the biggest in the world. Actually, Honor is the spin out of Huawei. So Huawei in 2020 could not continue with their phones because they didn't get the 5G chipsets. They didn't get the Android on their phones anymore. And so their whole business, which was about 50% of their revenue, just tumbled. They sold that whole division to Honor, which is a company in Hong Kong. And they continued the whole line of Huawei, which is kind of like, I would say, very weird that Honor and every Chinese company that is not called Huawei can actually continue with everything from the US except Huawei itself. But besides that, it was really a lifestyle product, which I truly enjoyed. It was a foldable phone, so the size of a book, actually. And it looked really fantastic. It had Porsche design. It was the thinnest phone available on the market. So the two phones together, the foldable phone looked as big as my phone is right now. And it was just fantastic. But they also had a fashion show around it. It was all about a lifestyle product. They even had the phone with
the moment that Pascal Coppens get excited about a fashion show, this is a memorable moment.
It's a memorable moment, right? But I think, I mean, not for myself, but I do believe this is something that people will really enjoy to be part of that. They even had a little phone with a tag around it. I mean, like a mini handbag. So it's like for women, you can actually carry this around, and it feels like your phone is a mini handbag. I mean, it's not a real handbag. And then the wallpaper changes based on the color of your dresses. So it just adjusts to what you're wearing. I mean, really cool stuff. Anyways.
Is there anything you bought, Pascal?
I don't know if you can buy things there, but the Honor phone, I would buy. So that as soon as I need a next phone, I probably would buy that phone. It is a little expensive. It's $3,000 US. So it's not a cheap phone, but that's with the Porsche design. If you take the normal design, which is just almost the same, but it doesn't look as cool, it's cheaper. So it's not cheap phones. But I liked it very much. ZTE, the competitor of Huawei, had a foldable phone, like a Post-it note that you unfold. Was also cool. But they also had a 3D laptop or tablet, which I liked, without eyewear. So it means that you don't need any glasses. And it felt really, I mean, like I saw things medical in there. like going in the bloodstream and so on, and it really felt like you could see it. And so I think this was quite nice. I wouldn't buy it now, but maybe in a couple of years when it's even improved. But it looks like these companies have gotten it right. It was AI enabled, 5G enabled, every buzzword you want. So that's the whole full package. But it's clear that the Chinese were in center stage at Mobile World Congress. Yes.
So
Peter, you were going to ask.
I'm going to ask a question, right? So, I mean, one of the things that fascinate me is that when you look at the telecom operators, I mean, this is where they go to. This is their big party of the year, right? And of course, they're going to find some really nice gadgets and some fun stuff and stuff that they want to sell. But have you seen anything that could really change the game for the telecom providers?
Of
Because
course, yeah.
the number one thing that they're challenged with is their relevance seems to be going down. They're still essential, but what can they do to really rebuild that relationship with their customers? It's something that Stephen and myself have been talking about for a really long time because we do a lot of work for the telco providers.
Yep.
And they have a massive customer base. They invest a shitload of money in infrastructure, but the relationship they have with their customers is fading away. And have you seen anything in Barcelona that would change that?
Well, I'm not an expert on everything and every RAN and other system that was out there, but if I looked at and I'm going to go back to Huawei because that was the booth that I was most impressed about. It wasn't about the antennas and about the 5.5G, which we talked about, which is 10 times faster. And so, I mean, these are all features, which is quite nice. But the one thing that they're launching now and promoting since Mobile World Congress, which I think makes completely sense, is what they call a 0-bit, 0-watt. And what that means is that they're using software solutions to verify how much energy the whole telecommunications system needs. And specifically when it's about the antennas, I mean, when you at some points at night, for example, you don't need to emit as much and you don't need to have the receivers and transmitters do the same job. And so that means that you can tone this down and have to an energy zero. And so Huawei is completely focused, and I'm sure some other companies at Mobile World Congress as well, completely focused on trying to find the optimal solution to go as quickly as possible without damaging the equipment to zero, so to have to zero energy. And specifically with IoT and factories, I thought this was pretty cool because they now have sensors which almost have no, I mean, Mickey, you know, there's 1,000 times better than I do, but sensors that basically produce almost nothing. And you wake them up and you make them go back to sleep whenever you need them. And these cost zero. I mean, it's 0 point something cents for each sensor. You can put them everywhere. And they gave examples on, for example, inventory. You probably need an inventory of a factory once a week or once a month. Why do you have all these sensors on constantly? You just need it at that point. And so this is new developments you see happening on the very high end, as well as on the very low end applications. It's all about energy these days. And AI is the center brain there to make it even more efficient so that they learn during the process to improve that. So that's one of the things that I think Huawei got right. And it was clear from the people listening to this story that they got very excited. I didn't see this in other places, but I'm assuming ZTE and I assume Cisco and all the others, Nokia and so on, they have a similar story. I just wasn't allowed inside the booth of Nokia or inside the booth of Cisco because I didn't have a badge. So that's I could get into all the Chinese booths. I don't know why, but that worked.
Could other people also go into all the Chinese
well,
booths?
if you speak Chinese, it helps.
Right.
But anyway, but I couldn't get into the Nokia and Cisco booth, and so I didn't really get that story. But I assume they have it too. Yeah. But I'm just saying this is the direction that I see people in this industry are getting excited about. Is to reduce the energy. It's also a reduction of cost by doing that as well. Mm-hmm. The only thing is you need to make sure it doesn't. This temperature change can also destroy sometimes the equipment, and that's the challenge these days. So that's one of the things. Of course, there was a lot about generative AI, which people also liked, and Huawei and others are doing a lot about services in education, in travel, in all kinds of things. So I could go on and on and on, but I think there's a new, with AI and generative AI, there's a new feeling that the telecom industry has new things to learn, and definitely when it's about sustainability. So I got excited.
I'll give you my 2 cents on that. I think Gen AI is, I see all the telcos embracing this like crazy. But I think the real big question is this going to be there to make them more efficient? 100%. But is it really going to change the use case of a telco because they're embracing this? It's not because they are technological entities that they have engineers, that they will be logically introducing this technology into a residential household or into a company. And I think that's, again, it's going to be a mindset shift for those telcos who really understand how to leverage that.
Yeah, but that's, Peter, what I saw with the booths on China Mobile and China Telecom, which were companies that usually are not on Mobile World. They were showing generative AI applications from travel, from education, from how to use these things. I saw a lot of these retail applications. These were the telecom operators that were already in China showing how to use generative AI. So in China, yes, for sure. I haven't seen it at many other places, other booths, except this kind of an avatar that you can talk to with the clip that we talked to about last time, if you remember, the Humane, I think it's called, which every booth had now almost. I mean, a lot of booths had to talk to this kind of avatar. It's cool if you see it once, but not if you see it 10 times. But I do believe that it's the Chinese telecom providers, they get it right, and I'm not sure how telecom providers here in Europe or America will do.
No, time will tell.
Did you see any of them making the balance right? Because I hear a lot of Gen AI. You could say, well, very optimistic, but as soon as you switch it on, you're negative towards planet, right? So sustainability and Gen AI are just like opposites of each other. And it's quite interesting in Davos that the whole talk of some Altman was about the fact that we need to find new energy sources because it's going, it's just going to be going into extremes. Did you see anything on that? Because I hear, okay, sustainability, that's nice, it's the CSRD reporting and helping on that, etc. But on the other side, I hear a lot of Gen AI, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, who's making the trade-offs?
Well, 90% of the booths were really talking about Gen AI and about AI. I mean, sustainability was one of the very few attentions. So, as I said, besides Huawei, I didn't notice it too much, but many people did have it on their slogans. I don't know if they actually have a solution. I wasn't going to buy any of that equipment, so I didn't get the details. So I don't know exactly, but I assume yes. But you're right, and I think some companies are taking it very serious, but it is going to be a huge issue. It's the power, the computing. The computing power is becoming a big challenge, and China is definitely challenged on that side.
That being said, my friends, shall we call it an episode for now?
Absolutely.
Very good.
Definitely.
Well, I would like to thank our audience, our listeners, for being here again. So if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with at least one of your colleagues. Give us a review on your favorite podcast channel, and definitely subscribe to the show. I want to thank Peter and Pascal for being here again, and of course Mieke De Ketelaere, Prof AI in Vlerick School. Thank you for being here, making the time for us, and sharing your insights and wisdom with our followers and our audience. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Right, we'll be back next month. Bye-bye.
Excellent.